Hello, and welcome back to Bumblebee, everyone. I haven't introduced myself in a while. I'm your host, Tereza, and today I'm here to drop some grisly knowledge in our video on the top 10 unveiled mysteries of the ancient Assyrian Empire. Let's start with a classic. Number 10 will be how these savage MFs were living for war. They loved it. Well, maybe not all the soldiers, seeing as this was one of those empires where you didn't really get a choice. See, all Assyrian men, poor, rich, tall, short, whatever, they were required to serve, making Assyria the first country to have mandatory military service. As a result, men worked in a 3-year cycle. In the first year, they would build roads, bridges, whatever great projects the king had in mind to build up the strength of the empire. In the second year, they would go out to war, all beefed up and tanned from the manual labor. Then, in year 3, they'd be allowed to live with their families, white picket fence style, before starting the cycle again. Obviously, they designated cycles based on birth dates and regions. That way, there's always men doing one of these 3 things, and always men to compensate for another group doing something else. The result of this genius plan was one of the strongest armies in the world. When they came to your town, the men at the gates were vicious, battle-hardened, and really wanted to spend a year with their kids. And there were a lot of them. Before the battle even began, people would be given a chance to surrender. An Assyrian envoy would ride up to the city walls and just start banging on doors like a bunch of twits, knowing the people inside are literally terrified of their nation. Well, they shout crap like, "Make peace with me and come out. Then each of you will eat fruit from your vine and fig tree and drink water from your cistern," as if this is an Assyrian Rapunzel situation. And if Rapunzel ain't trying to let her hair down, or more accurately have her kingdom be under Assyrian rule, then they're given a final offer and told if they don't accept it, they will have to eat their own excrement and drink their own urine. Oh yeah, country surrendered. Some went a little too crazy with it, like the king of Urartu, who literally impaled himself in the chest when he was told the Assyrians were approaching. Others sent envoys to the Assyrians, surrendering to them before they even tried to think about invading. But honestly, the reactions are fair. The Assyrian army didn't always stop at killing their enemies. When the Assyrian king Sennacherib invaded Babylon, he wiped them off the map. All he left behind was a message boasting of how far he'd gone to decimate them. Seems kinda dramatic, doesn't it? Were the Assyrians really that terrifying? Well, number 9 is breakdown time, quite literally, because they were grinding bone. So, the Assyrians mastered the art of war, and unfortunately for their enemies, they also mastered the art of torment, which they then proceeded to brag about everywhere. See, the Assyrians did the super fun thing where they depicted said torment very graphically on pretty much any flat wall they could find, let alone the death tablets. Because of this, we now know they did in fact do things like cut off someone's limbs, gouge their eyes out, and let the victim roam around like that. They forced the captured nobles to grind the bones of their ancestors because they believed by doing so, they erased the evidence of noble legitimacy to rule. This part was psychological torment. It showed the absolute power that the Assyrian kings had over the subjected nations. You can learn more about the Assyrians and other nations like theirs from plenty of Bumblebee videos, so this is your reminder to subscribe to the Hive. Anyways, the Assyrians were proud of their tactics. They loved to impale their victims on large stakes, flay them publicly, and then hang the skin in locations of the city as a reminder for their citizens. Soldiers decapitated the defeated enemies and built pyramids out of their heads, or they even played Christmas decorating trees with them. All of this, as mentioned, was documented in the Death Tablets, which is number 8. Like the world's worst comic strip, the Assyrians documented in imagery the torment, defeat, and display of their enemies. This starts in just temples or palaces, but eventually the entire city was comprised of these macabre etched murals. This really bloomed under Assyrian king Ashurnasirpal II, who left behind the most, well, effed up ones. One lovely example for you is, "I flayed many right through my land and draped their skins over the walls," or "I burned their women and men. A pillar of heads I erected in front of the city." Sounds like some pleasant home decor, doesn't it? We got HomeSense out here selling live, laugh, love, when you could be hanging pleasantries like that on your wall. But you wouldn't, right? Because it'd terrify guests and make you look insane. Well, howdy doody, that's actually why the Assyrians did this. It's not like they loved the visuals of death so much they perceived it as art. Maybe some crazies did, sure, but ultimately, the The curved relief served two purposes. When nobles or kings or traders visited, they'd be terrified and carry stories of what they saw back to their respective lands. And then, it was also made to make the Assyrians truly look crazy, which was actually hard to do back then. Crazy and willing to showcase how effed up they are to their enemies? Yeah, when these guys came and knocked on your door, you're probably gonna lay down your swords. Every person watching their chariots approach would know that, compared to the fate that the Assyrian army brought, death would be a relief. And by God, if you were stupid or egotistical enough not to open those doors and lay down your arms, then number 7 will teach you about the Assyrians' Inventions of War. Siege gear barely existed at the time of the Assyrian empires. At very best, an army could hope to break through a city's gates by rushing at it with a log, and this is usually while archers fired down on them from above. The Assyrians, though, invented the battering ram, a device that would be completely unstoppable in their time. This was a whole engine on wheels, with an iron-capped ram that swung from chains, letting it crush its way through enemy walls like never before. Overhead, the men inside the engine were protected by wooden plates covered in damp animal skins, usually a ram, because why not maintain the namesake? That put out the flaming arrows fired from the defenders above. And if they couldn't ram their way through, well, they're going up and over. Siege towers suspended large wooden beams that were tipped with metal point so that they could be forcefully pushed up the walls, or metal points could loosen brickwork by moving a beam in a circular motion from the ground. Assyrians were also the first to use iron to make their weapons. Iron was stronger than bronze by a landslide, which gave them a distinct advantage when the enemy would swing a bronze weapon at them and the Assyrians could simply slash it in half. They proceeded to make their armor from iron as well, and that essentially made them damn well invincible. These guys even learned how to build roads for quick and easy movements of troops so that conquered rebelling kingdoms could easily be brought back under control. Number 6 is what happens once you've been sieged and now you're an Assyrian captive. This was covered in my recent video, Unbearable Living Conditions of the Past You Wouldn't Believe, and it prompted a lot of interest. So let's dive into the freaky deaky world of captivity. To start, like any nation, when the Assyrians pillaged and razed settlements, they would take the surviving people to be sold. Now, what they do a couple things differently from this point onwards. As mentioned, they built roads on their conquest with the intention of making it easier to bring back captives. I don't know if you remember or had this in your primary school days. Do you remember line leaders? Maybe it was your birthday or the teacher picked every day. It doesn't matter. What it was when your class got into a line for break or to come in from recess, that person got to be the line leader. Kids clamored for it, volunteered to be a line leader in school. But you definitely don't want to be an Assyrian line leader. The Assyrians would blind everyone they were taking captive except the line leader. They watched everyone get blinded. Then, shackled together in rows of 100, the line leader would do as their name entails. Everyone would be shuffling along until they reached their destination. No food or water. If you died on the way, I'm not kidding, the line kept moving and would drag the body until hopefully it disconnected at some point. And once at the destination, the line leader would also have his eyes gouged out. Men and women captives weren't divvied up like other empires either. Sure, an especially pretty woman may be saved from hard labor, saved being debatable term because then her rule would become that of a consentless body, but on average it was both men and women who were put into the usual hard and brutal labor of captive work, such as pushing the grindstone until you die, farm labor, being forced to drag massive rocks like mules. Behind them, their new captive masters were always watching, ready to attack anyone who slacked. So obviously not every person is a bad person, and as you heard, these men were on a rotation draft. Number 5 will be how many soldiers had documented PTSD. Life under the threat of Assyria was horrifying. Obviously, it was that for the Assyrians as well as their victims. Documents found from the empire through a multitude of decades actually mention men of the Assyrian army reporting experiences that many modern psychologists say show widespread symptoms of post-traumatic stress. They described hearing and seeing ghosts talking to them, who would be the ghosts of people they had killed in battle, says Professor Jamie Hacker Hughes. That's exactly the experience of modern-day soldiers who've been involved in close hand-to-hand combat. The horrors and the guilt of killing and hurting innocent people wreaked havoc on their psyches, especially for those who were not inclined to violence whatsoever. Keep in mind, it's a rotating draft, and every man had to do a year of battle at the end of every 3. If they didn't do do what they were ordered and didn't fight with gusto, they could dub you a traitor or a weak link and do to you what you're supposed to do to the enemies. This meant lots of men were put into horrific situations, forced to do things they never normally would, and many couldn't stomach. When their year at war ended, they were allowed to return home to their families, but they lived lives haunted by ghosts of the people they inflicted all these torments on. And like I said, you do what you're told, because number 4 is the law of the land. The ancient Assyrians were inhabitants of one of the world's earliest civilizations, Mesopotamia, which began to emerge around 3500 BC. As a result, they invented the world's first written language, 360-degree circle, and established Hammurabi's code of law. If your memory needs a jog, that's the eye for an eye one taken real literally. If you kissed another man's wife, they cut off your lower lip with an axe. If a man is caught with another man, they shall turn him into a eunuch. Adultery was punishable by death. Some crimes were dealt with in completely diabolical ways, such as men had the right to kill to an adulterous wife, in a society where women have no rights to defense. That meant your husband could just lie if he wanted to get rid of you and toss your ass onto a bonfire alive. One that I think is a little less unreasonable is that killers were handed over to the victim's family and they're free to do with them what they will. Hilariously, if you're accused of thievery, yes, that warrants the death sentence, but if you said you bought it and bring your accuser to court, as long as you have somebody, literally any random person, that back up the claim that you bought the item even if you didn't, the person you stole it from would be the one put to death. I mean, if you wanted to fight the law, you could always try. Anyone's allowed to bring any case against anyone else, but better make sure the charges are gonna stick, because if they don't, it's the accuser that's going to be killed. And what's super fun for the entire kingdom is that reduce, reuse, resettle was one of the laws. Number 3 on our countdown. Imagine an entire rural settlement is given 72-hour notice that they are getting up and moved to the big city. If you don't, you die. Well, all of Assyria was subject to exactly that in the form of their resettlement policy, which uprooted whole families and moved them across the country. However crazy it sounds, it was one of the ideas that made Assyria so strong. Having these population groups systematically transferred between different regions of the empire strengthened their political unity and even put down possible rebellions. Imperial administrators planned the population transfers, taking into account political, economical, and cultural considerations to see where these communities would best resettle. This is actually kind of polite and ensured comfort, but it wasn't for that reason. It's because once the populace was resettled into the kingdom, they were spread throughout, not kept in secular communities together. This kept them from packing together and staging revolt, and also forced assimilation on a broad scale. Now for some tall tales and long ones. Number 2 is Lion Slayer. In ancient Assyria, hunting lions was considered the sport of kings, symbolic of the ruling monarchy's duty to protect and fight for his people. The sculpted reliefs created for King Ashurbanipal's palace in Nineveh displayed his greatest hunts. But let's delve a little further into the symbology of the lion. According to Ashurbanipal's annals, at the beginning of his reign, 2 deities, Adad and Ea, blessed the lands of Assyria with plenty of rain. This rain caused the forests to thrive and the reeds in the marshes to flourish. This resulted in a population explosion amongst lions, who took to the hills and the plains, murking herds of cattle, sheep, and people. The king, following in the footsteps of his predecessors, took charge of the lion hunts in order to control the lion population, but later it became for sport. Apparently lions were captured alive and put inside of cages in the king's garden in Nineveh and used to stage lion hunts, as depicted in 3 play-by-play relief panels in the king's palace. On the lower panel, the king is seen pouring out wine libation over the carcasses of 4 lions. Because the tradition of lion rearing, Assyrians had a long history of depicting their king and warriors as mighty lions or great lion hunters. The extended lion metaphor that can be found in the Book of Nahum 2:11-13 includes 2 major varieties of Neo-Assyrian lion motif: the depiction of the Assyrian king and his warriors as mighty lions, and the Assyrian king and his warriors as the lion hunters. While the Assyrians kept these 2 motifs separate, Nahum dovetailed the 2, but in doing so also reversed their original significance. By making these reversals, Nahum created an unexpected twist on the Assyrian usage as well. According to Nahum, the Assyrians were like lions. To be sure, however, not in the way that they depicted themselves. Rather than being like lions on the prowl for prey, the hunters would become the hunted. Nahum was keenly aware of the culture that he was writing to and was able to effectively use it to convey a powerful message from the Lord. This ties us perfectly into number 1, which will be Assyria and the Hebrew Bible. The Assyrians get name dropped in the Hebrew Bible a whole lot. The first 200 years of the Assyrian Empire coincides with the early kings of the Jewish people, including David and Solomon. As the Assyrians gained power and influence in the region, they became a larger force in biblical narrative. The Neo-Assyrian Empire Empire spent pretty much any chance it got effing up Israel and Judah between the 9th and the 7th century BCE. And now it leaves us with a paper trail of crap talk longer than their kingdom even lasted. Let's go over some of the Assyrians' most iconic celeb cameo moments in the Hebrew Bible, shall we? So, Shalmaneser III, famous black obelisk, describes King Jehu of Israel paying tributes to the Assyrians. The 6.5-foot tall black obelisk features 20 reliefs depicting 5 defeated kings bringing tribute before the Neo-Assyrian monarch. The prostate figure in the bottom panel is thought to be King Jehu, also a Bible boy. And according to the Bible, during his 738 BCE campaign to conquer and assimilate the 10 tribes of Israel that had split from the nation of Judah to form the southern kingdom, Tiglath-Pileser III made Israel's kings forced to pay tribute to Assyria as vassals and attempting to rebel. Israelite King Menahem, in turn, taxed every landowner 50 shekels of silver to pay his tribute. Assyrian King Esarhaddon and the story of Joseph in the Bible have enough similarities it's raised eyebrows. Like the story of Joseph from the book of Genesis, Esarhaddon was favored by his father over the older brothers and had to flee to a foreign land for safety. After eventually gaining the throne, he pacified the land and expanded the Assyrian Empire. Then there was the fact that the Hebrew prophets taunted the fall of Assyria. It happened around the end of 615 when the Babylonians, Medes, and Scythians start taking over Assyrian land. Alrighty, we are at the end of another video. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to like and subscribe to see more from us, and until next time, don't volunteer to lead any lines.